You exiles will never mine again. Toil with shells, wood, and leather until 2 goblin empires crumble before you. The High Judge's words were as heavy on every step of the trek to the far side of the world as when they'd first crushed spirits. Only then will you be true dwarves again. Take this ornamental silver axe, fit only for trees, and leave. It was a death sentence. 7 of them, plus eventual trickles of exiles the kingdom wanted to get rid of, going up against nearly 7,000 goblins. But though Psylob and his friends knew it would be hard, even they underestimated the frigid hell they were stepping into and the lengths they'd have to go to just to glimpse upon the chance of completing their odyssey. Mining is one of the first things you do in a regular game, both to procure stone you build with and to carve out space for an underground fortress. Psylob and Sham obviously can't, and instead rely on cutting the trees around them down to get the ball rolling. The first logs chopped are used for a fishery and a woodworking station to base the entire economy around. Olan the carpenter gets to work mass-producing wooden blocks that are much easier to use for building than raw logs, which starts their carpentry journey off and allows the others to get to building a bridge across the turbulent river, a bowyer to equip a hunter with a crossbow, and a kitchen across the creek. These would normally go in mined out rooms and be built from stone in the process, but here, everything is just built in the open. One of the yaks is sacrificed for its cookable meat, tannable hide worked at a station just south of the kitchen, and to fashion its bones into bolts at a crafter station. They're much weaker than metal, but they are still at least better than just shouting pew pew. They're enough for hunting, and so Sodal gets to work bringing back prey to butcher, since that'll fuel some of the limited industries available to them without digging down into the ground. Fishing is one of those things, and while the food won't hurt, it's primarily used to gather the plentiful shells that come from mussels. These are amazing for decorations, though they'll only be used that way once a carver turns them into a few pieces of armor. It's incredibly weak, but it is still better than nothing. The distinctive look and matching outfits on an army might strike fear into whatever the goblins have in place of hearts. And there will be plenty of goblins to fight along their journey. The homeland they were exiled from lies to the far northeast, but they were sent all the way to the southern tip of the world, to a continent with nothing but forests and icy tundra and goblin empires they'll have to fight to the death. Normally, it's fairly easy to mine out 100 or 200 expansive bedrooms while harvesting stone used for other projects. But here, the dwarves instead have to make everything out of this flimsy and ugly wood, so it's safe to say that their happiness won't be coming from nice bedrooms anytime soon. Instead, they'll sleep in a basic dormitory. A few floors are added in the corners of one room, since there aren't even enough blocks for the entire roof yet. Beds have to be placed indoors, but they only check directly above them, so the 90% open room is technically indoors in the corners, and dwarves can sleep there just fine. The resources saved are used to instead kick off a grand tavern spanning the river that allows the dwarves a simple place to eat while looking at the river below. The rushing water is pretty to a human, but to a dwarf, the blistering sun above makes them angry and bitter that they still can't dig beneath the ground. The homeland told them to expect a trade caravan every autumn, though it's mostly just arriving to check up on the exiled dwarves and to make sure they didn't run off or grab a pickaxe. The broker here that'll deal with them is selected strictly for their good sense of comedy to mock the traders. Their office goes in the thin space beneath the inn, which is resource efficient, even if it will be a little bit embarrassing to actually negotiate there. The traders brought a single metal bar to taunt the dwarves with, and everything they have is only being offered for frankly absurd prices. Which, I mean, the trader is just nervously telling jokes as they get ripped off, so it's kind of on choosing a comedian to do the negotiating and not the homeland's hate of this place. Psylob ascends to be the manager, though he kind of already was, since he's the one who led the conspiracy back home and named the fortress after himself once exiled. But being the official manager means that they can assign work orders. There'll be plenty in time, but for now, he asks Olan to make corkscrews, pipes, and blocks needed for some screw pumps. It'd be great if they could make wooden mechanisms for these and for other projects down the line, but apparently the flimsy material wouldn't be able to take it, and mechanisms have to be made out of stone or metal. Once worked or powered, that'll pump water from the river and into a small reservoir. Before it has the chance to be built though, the river freezes in the cool autumn air. It makes it easier to cross the top of the ice, but it means the screw pump won't be working year round once they're in, and the dwarves might fall in when the ice eventually thaws. Since the screw pumps were going to help with happiness, other care will have to be had for keeping dwarves in good moods. Take Ast, who wields the silver axe that fuels the entire economy here. That makes her an almost religious figure who hates intellectual conversation and gets annoyed when she has to drink from barrels. And while she can have some simple wooden mugs, those aren't nearly as nice, as valuable, or as happy thought inspiring as nicer metal ones. These similar issues will compound over time. The first migrants arrive, and there are a lot of them. The Homeland must have tons of exiles descend to what they think is their stoneless and metalless death. Among them are a legendary weaponsmith and a legendary stonecrafter that aren't exactly going to be putting their skills to use anytime soon, plus a legendary wood crafter that'll keep Onal making more pragmatic furniture at a carpenter's instead of carving at a crafting station. The other 5 will have more general roles, including some like Doran here, that form the basis of an army. Those that can't help fight will be useful builders around the village as they work to expand the inn and host a party to welcome this new arrival. They start coming here to listen to stories and reminisce together, which is great for their moods and just nice to see in a game like this. Sure, they would like it more if they were in some barely lit cavern underground instead of surrounded by frigid snow, but there's something to be said for the warm smile of company you're forced to keep. Or is that Stockholm Syndrome? Either way, some windows would help keep the chill out while preserving the view, but those need glass made from sand they don't have or gems they can never mine or buy. Wood can be made into little ornamental carvings generously called gems, but those can't be used for gem windows, which is a real shame since that would fit the rest of Siloblin Sham's aesthetic. The only logical thing to do now is to start training to go kill some goblins about it. Good old martial therapy. The military, headed by Tobul, who came with the first 7 dwarves, picks up 4 of the migrants. They all have their own weapons of choice, but given how much is made from wood around here, they'll all learn the axe instead. It might not be efficient, but it definitely fits Siloblin Sham's vibe, which, speaking of, they only have weak, dulled training weapons made of wood right now. Those are probably worse than just punching, but that should change in time. They need plenty of other gear too, and while the equipment screen has dozens of kinds of leather you can choose from, it doesn't actually let you choose shell as a material. It's almost like dwarves aren't supposed to just have leather and shells to defend against a goblin's metal. At least Olan's good enough that they make masterpiece training axes. So the goblins will be so blinded by the beauty that they shed tears as they slaughter the dwarves desperately trying to work wood through iron chainmail. Above the inn, dwarves start planning to bring water lifted by screw pumps in when the river thaws. A planter that foolishly thought they were a miner here can start working fields while builders add an altar area beneath the inn. That means plenty of flooring so that no one falls in when it thaws. That's more than enough for them to pray to their various gods, and they do so with good reason. They have close friends here. The rest of winter passes fairly quickly while the dwarves work wood. The military eagerly awaits fish shells for armor they can train with, and dwarves huddling about hoping for spring. The greatest threat is the absolute sin the migrant hunter committed when they brought a metal crossbow. That quickly gets forbidden, as does the iron axe a warrior brought. I'll have to be more vigilant checking all future immigrants to make sure they aren't smuggling contraband in. Unfortunately, it's around this point that I realize the first of the many mistakes I make this run. This one is in the temple just beneath the inn. Above it, there are grates originally planned to let water flow from the canal and fall back down into the river, but the temple kinda doesn't have that. I guess the water will have to be funneled south into the river, while the temple is moved to the top of the carpentry area's roof. It's quick work with so much of the population free to build, which means that it's time for the military to stop helping them out and instead start training. If they're going to have much worse gear than the goblins they'll be fighting, they might as well be better trained. The temple finishes moving before snow thaws, and people flood there to worship and also build out the place so that no one falls off. This far from the kingdom, OSHA checks aren't that frequent, but death still is a little bit concerning. 2 more weeks pass, and the snow very suddenly thaws all at once, though the river stays frozen beneath the inn, still working on a water pipe to deliver the dwarves a beautiful waterfall. The river thaws, and it's time to test what will eventually feed an aqueduct. Someone comes to start manually pumping it, sends water spewing everywhere, because I somehow always forget that water moves diagonally in this game, pushes them into the river, and they kinda drown. So that's kinda my second mistake. In better news, fishing can resume. Let's focus on that, everyone. Look at the pretty shells while Rakost is kinda washed away down the river. Once he's gone, the rest can get to work testing this new design, confirm that it won't push them into the river, and then start building the stack up a bit, with a second screw press and scaffolding to wall it in. New migrants wander to find this construction ongoing. A couple join the military, while the rest get to work around the city. They can help with more scaffolding and walls until the full layer is built out. Back down below, a legendary fisher that came with the last migrant wave has already gotten to work. I mean, really, it only takes a week for it to start to leave a huge pile of live fish just flopping about on the floor in the middle of town. That leaves tons of food and, more importantly, a lot of shells for armor and for crafting. But there's another problem. The pump is almost ready, but this stack cannot be powered. Manual pumping won't work since that would leave room for water to flow out after pumping. Windmills made of logs can generate infinite sustainable power, which is able to be transmitted through wooden axles, but actually changing the power's direction to go down vertically requires a mechanism made of metal they don't have yet. Buying metal is not allowed, but there are other ways to procure it. No Dwarven law would forbid stealing from goblins. That involves 2 hunters joining a squad of their own. These are proficient ambushers who have honed their skills tracking stealthy wildlife. They're masters of remaining unseen. Able to infiltrate the goblins the city will eventually have to mobilize armies against anyways. Maybe not. That'd be too risky. If they were caught and tracked back, or kidnapped and interrogated, the whole Goblin Empire might come attack before the military is ready. In the end, the squad of hunters goes to sneakily rob one small goblin village in the northwest, not affiliated with the nearby empires. It's a long trek, and it only further proves how much work is left to be done before they regain their honor. The hunters aren't back before human traders arrive to sell some seeds, glass, and clay, but the military does return soon after. After trekking nearly across the world, I'm sure they took a lot of care and got caught on their first mission. Even worse, that they trekked so far to avoid directly assailing the nearby empire, the goblins they attacked were allied with them anyways, and both factions declare war. That's pretty much as bad as it can go, all for one giant copper axe blade they looted. While it's great that they saw an axe and took it, which fits Siloblin Sham, something this big is only fit for a trap that's not gonna be used anytime soon. Well, now that they have been caught, the melee squads that aren't trained in stealth might as well join them in venturing out to steal from smaller settlements. Hopefully, their wooden weapons are good enough to cut through civilians. But since this war might bring counterattacks, Ast, the woodcutter, prepares space for a wall that will ring the fortress, while the others scurry about fishing, making sustenance, and working their crafts in preparation for a war that's here before even a full year has passed. It isn't long before the soldiers return, ironically without getting caught like the supposedly stealthier hunters. They've got some basic copper gear, silver arrows, and a silver trap piece with them, which they looted from the goblins. It's not the worst haul, and this is the only way they can get bits of metal, though actually turning it into more useful gear will require some fireproof building materials to make a furnace and an anvil to actually work metal ingots into equipment. Those are kind of the main current goals to really start making progress, which means the military will have to find all of this abroad. While raiding, the soldiers also look for any crumbs of metal equipment or usable materials, while the entire base is ringed with a wall. It isn't finished before more migrants arrive, most of whom aren't that great, but there is at least a legendary bone carver who will make fantastic shell armor. Maybe that will be almost halfway to being kind of passably usable. Barely. The migrants also have a wood burner who will help the fortress by working the first wood burning furnace built with bits of imported clay suited for withstanding this intense heat. Just don't let any loose ashes of logs being burned down into charcoal fly off and light up the entirely wooden fortress. This is just the first part of getting a functional metal economy going, but at least one more fire-safe material is needed for another type of furnace. While this could be deconstructed and the clay passed around, that feels a little cheaty, so we're going to avoid that. The recently returned military suffers its first death not at the hand of goblins, but in a drowning. Tobal was one of the initial 7 dwarves. He was supposed to lead the fight against the goblins, but an accident while training ends with him stumbling back into a lake and flailing about while unable to crawl out. No one can even fish his corpse out, so there's a good chance they'll come back as a ghost and start haunting whoever was training with them. Hopefully, the spree of flooring that goes in to cover the stagnant lakes and eventually the river itself are some kind of comfort, though they might not be alone in death for too long. A miner with a crippling pickaxe addiction wanders around deliriously. Blocking off the older and nicer temple probably doesn't help too much. Neither will a second carpenter, added to expand the woodworking needs and make more blocks for the city, or the fact that the local Loot Pinata Goblin village has finished securing all their loose goods. The military continues alternating between training more and heading off to raid other smaller towns as the second summer comes to an end. They bring back the occasional shield, an unholy abomination of an item that should never be touched, and the first stone that can be installed here in the form of an altar. It's a shame it can't be broken down into something more useful, but it is at least something nice, even if bowing their heads to worship something they themselves can't dig out of the ground feels awfully strange to dwarves. The military is rocking gear in almost every slot, although most of that is flimsy shell and leather gear that's only slowly upgraded as raids bring back a shield or other random piece of gear made of metal. Since Dwarven law is fairly forgiving on stealing from goblins, they can use it. The goblins' first counterattack is just as stealthy as the outgoing raids, though they're after dwarven children and not loose bits of metal. Fortunately, the snatchers flee once caught, and the next dwarven attack outwards moves with more fervor than normal, though that does not translate to better loot. The hunters and axe dwarves have looted a few metal weapons, though none of which they're actually good with. The more skilled axe dwarves continue training with their wooden weapons, while another squad of less experienced soldiers that have picked up experience with armor head out to raid goblins. What they find will be used to train a few promising dwarves with basic fighting skills who train up at home amidst swelling numbers as more loot is found for more recruits. So though axe dwarves may win the day later on, for now, these soldiers will do a great job of protecting Siloblin. The archers will also start training, since they should be able to do a decent job with bone bolts, and might ward off attacks by metal-clad goblins or giant creatures before the soldiers are swinging weapons that can deal with them. Every last soldier is going to be equipped in shell armor for as long as they can be. Having 20 dwarves committed to the military is a lot in such a small settlement, but frankly, there isn't that much work that can actually be done around this place without stone or metal. The civilians spend most of their time scaffolding around the fortress to build the wall up, while Autumn's chill starts to seep into their bones. A checkup from the Homeland arrives, and there's more than just good food to offer up. The traders are hoping for bad news, but the soldiers got caught on their latest raids, and the few dwarves both escaped unscathed, and Eton delivered the first goblin kill this fortress has ever known. The only bad part of this engagement is that they were chased off before they could find anything they could borrow in the long term. The food is traded for a few instruments and other bits. Unfortunately, they don't have anything fireproof that can be used for furnaces, and right now, Silob reminds the military that that's the #1 priority, even if it seems just a little unnecessary for now, as shell gear keeps them safe while they get kills when they do occasionally get caught. Still, it's incredibly doubtful that what they have now is enough for the bigger fortresses with proper militaries. The second level of the wall starts going in shortly before new migrants arrive, which bring the fort up to almost 50 just after the fortress's first anniversary. Raids continue going out constantly, stealing whatever they can find. It's a lot of pickaxes, but no anvils or more useful bars. They do bring back animals that are able to be butchered, which ensures the military has plenty of leather chest pieces to protect them. Time passes quickly, and the river freezes a second time. A bridge is built at the front of the base as winter nears, though without metal mechanisms, it won't be slamming shut on any intruders anytime soon. The military continues bringing back everything they can find, though sadly, not everything in the fortress came from being liberated. Some still belongs to traders who bait me by having it here. They seem reluctant to leave because they suffered a sudden panic attack in the middle of the base, and it just ends up being a premonition of the goblin attack that comes soon after. There are 6 here, though they seem to all have some decent metal gear that's much better than the shell, leather, and wood the dwarves are rocking. Dwarven archers head for the fortifications overlooking the entrance, which act as cover they can shoot their bone bolts through. Fortunately for the dwarves, the goblins get in a brawl with a human lasher that's supposed to be here guarding the merchant. The human lasts just long enough for the 3rd dwarven squad to return from abroad before falling. The bloodthirsty goblins chase over the corpse and kill a child outside before the army can get there. And though the dwarves only have 1 weapon between the 6 of them, they group up and overwhelm individual goblins, punching, kicking, and even biting their way to victory. Other fights go similarly, and with the help of some merchant guards and the goblins' poor military discipline, those forces are eventually repelled. The ebbing smell of goblin doesn't rid the scent of loot from the air. The humans only drop oversized armor that won't fit the shorter dwarves, but the dead goblins drop properly petite metal armor. Though maybe wait for the river to thaw so they can wash the goblin blood off of all of it. The shell squad isn't going to upgrade to bits of copper and iron. The familiar clink of it is almost a way of life for them at this point. The counterattack raids brought doesn't stop more from going out. And while it seems like the iron bar the dwarves can sniff out might come from one of those, it's unfortunately just been left alongside a bunch of fire-safe stone blocks the traders left behind at the depot. Taking that would definitely be cheating, so though it taunts me, it's getting forbidden too. And of course, after doing that, the very next raid brings an iron anvil after spending nearly a full year searching for one. An optimist might say this is a reward for not breaking the rules, but it definitely just feels like it's mocking me, since the anvil is basically just decorative until they find another fire-safe block. Raids continue on as winter passes, and while the soldiers have grown so stealthy that they rarely get into fights, that is not always the case. The new year arrives shortly before the held boulders come back without their leader. Dumed was not one of the original 7 dwarves that came with Siloblincham, but he was still an early member of the fortress and one of the founders of the military. When the dwarves swap from merely hiding and biding their time to destroying the goblins, the city of matched cruelty that struck them down will be the first target. Ast, the soldier, not the woodcutter, steps up to lead the army for the foreseeable future, even if Dumed's recent death does have them so cautious that they only steal 2 lousy sandals on their first loot run. The spring brings an elven caravan, and though they use a giant elephant that could hold tons of blocks as a pack animal, elves aren't exactly known for working stone or metal. It's kind of why they come to dwarves. That's enough for Silob to turn the corner so they can see her, snub them, and go get a drink. When Silob finally shows up, there's nothing good, and so she pisses them off by bragging about how many trees they chopped down to get each of the barrels in front of the elves. Sodal even makes a show of loving on his crossbow made of freshly chopped wood. Though, on a more serious note, soldiers getting attached to their wooden weapons is a bit dangerous, since it means they won't upgrade to better gear if they have it. Though metal might be a long ways off. The Goblins have another iron anvil that's stolen on the very next raid. At this point, the wood furnace, which made charcoal for fuel, definitely could and probably should be disassembled to make a regular smelter, but that's still off limits, since just reusing things would be a little bit too easy. There will eventually be more clay from traders or metal bars stolen from abroad, hopefully soon. Warm smiles help spring deepen, and the snow eventually melts. The crafts dwarves want a guild before the river can give in to the growing warmth and unfreeze too. That first building, with the carpentry area and the temple, gets a completed roof, and then a 3rd story added on for the guild. Walls around it will help secure it so that dwarves can't, say, fall off and into a newly thawed river where they drown because they're unable to flail and grab onto a ledge to lift themselves out. Actually making a place worth calling a guild hall is fairly difficult without access to more valuable materials. Though the soldiers allowed to train up at home are now professional fighters and experts with their admittedly ineffective weapons, the soldiers abroad continue showing their inexperience and drop to goblins on occasion. They are still 10 and 2, which isn't bad considering most of them lack real weapons, but they really do need better gear if they want to have any chance of winning a larger war against goblins with militaries. Not that losses stop them from going out again and again and again looking for loot. More are going to die, but dwarves are expendable. Gear is forever. Idle hands go to building a 3rd story to the wall ringing the base. It's not quite in time before the 2nd test arrives, though even if it were, neither it nor archers at the gate would stop goblins from catching Olan the legendary carpenter outrunning a simple errand near the entrance. They attack her, and her grievous wounds elicit screams that draw charging soldiers. With the woman who made their weapons bleeding out before them, the soldiers enter a vicious, bloodthirsty rampage that ends with every last goblin dead and not a single loss on their end. But Olan is still too injured to stand. Mestos comes to grab the bleeding woman and bring her back to the hospital, but it's too late. Olan dies before she even gets to see the city walls again, and a horrified Mestos goes to clean blood off their hands. The carpentry station from which Olan wrought most of what built this city has hundreds more of their product just waiting to be used. There's even one unfinished cabinet laying around that will never be finished. Hell, no one's ever going to use this almost holy workstation ever again. It's a monument now. Those goblins might have struck one of the few blows that make the idea that dwarves are expendable so laughable, but they did at least have the decency to apologize by leaving some more usable, if bloody, metal armor about. The human traders everyone's hoping help with that bring another iron anvil to taunt everyone with, but little else of value beyond some less useful clay, glass, cloth, and leather, traded for a few lavish meals. It's fine. The Dwarven merchants coming next season were asked to bring glass blocks that should work, and they often have the better types of clay regardless. Though Olan didn't make it to the hospital, a few soldiers charging in to try and save them did. And so the hospital is filled out with wood another carpenter makes to help treat the injured going forward. The newest migrant wave brings more soldiers that can replace those lost to both outgoing and incoming raids, including plenty of carpenters who'd be eager to take off where Olan left off. Onol gets the job, though at a new station for it just above the stockpile of logs. It isn't the first of the new guard replacing the old, but it still hurts to have to arrange every time. Well, that's alarming. The Homeland is making moves. The Goblin Empire to the far southwest is under attack, and the Homeland conquered and occupied two of their central settlements. It makes Psylob's jobs easier, but it also signals a shift in policy. Do they suddenly not believe in Psyloblincham? Ast the Woodcutter is taking a little break from hunting vermin to the south, partially because her dead lover's ghost is hanging around the base, which, fair, that'd be uncomfortable. But it could also be that someone forgot to build a bridge over the river, and the right half of the map is completely sealed off from the entrance. Just before summer ends and the Dwarven caravan arrives, raiders come back with something promising. Bismuth bars are a type of metal. Perhaps, of course not. It can be used for building, but it's not fire safe enough for furnaces. At least it's proof the military hasn't forgotten what metal bars look like. Now they'll just need to find iron, copper, or any of the plethora of other ones that'll do. It's perhaps fitting that as a little room for coffins is prepared, one dwarf strangles another in a brutal brawl. Bombwreck suddenly snapped from the pressure and the horrendous mood, infecting more of the fortress. They tried to attack Tobel and forced the now injured waxworker to defend themselves. This is not the last there'll be of mood problems. But in far more grave news than just filling one grave, the start of autumn ticks by without any Dwarven merchants or diplomats coming. They were supposed to come from the Homeland, and they were being counted on for legal imports of glass for the furnaces, but they seem to be ignoring Psyloblincham. The purpose of those settlements to the southwest is abundantly apparent now. They're the replacement, supposed to carry out the mission after the Homeland lets Psyloblincham fall. But hey, at least the raiders find a 7th anvil to make up for that. Just please punch a hole in a goblin wall, steal one brick of metal. That's all you have to do. The fact that the dwarves might never have metal is starting to get to the soldiers, and one even becomes attached to their now legendary hunk of wood. That disgustingly elf-like behavior is enough that the axe-wielding squad gets a forced break, so they take their gear off and can't get acquainted to become more like those leaf-kissing hippies. The dwarves need metalworking, and they need it now, so the archers squad join the other dwarves in venturing out to double just how quickly loot gets brought back. They do get caught a little at first since their sneaking skills are rusty, but they manage to fight their way out just fine. What isn't fine is that autumn finishes passing without word from the Homeland. This was not a mere delay. This is nothing short of a purposeful snubbing. Or perhaps they'll show up next year and this year's caravan just got attacked by a giant the Goblin sent. Civilians flee back to the fortress a little too slowly and are killed as the monster approaches. It wasn't just anyone though. That was Psylob, the founder of this venture, the original conspirator, and now they lay dead just like the Homeland wanted. Oh, those earlier words about dwarves being expendable ring so hollow now. Over a dozen gang up on the beast and beat it down without further losses, but Psylob still will be missed, and the dwarves set out to gather up what's left of her for her tomb. With the threat handled and everything fine save for a few injured soldiers that'll have to drink scummy pond water till they recover, it's fine for the soldiers to start heading out again. The squads head for the Goblins near the Homeland's new pet projects in the southwest in hopes of hearing little bits of news from any goblins they corner. They find little there but loot and a goblin they rescue for some reason. The soldiers return as I get carpal tunnel syndrome building out bedrooms in a way the game definitely never intended for you to have to do, and people dying because there isn't much safe water to drink. So maybe the cage the goblin was in wasn't actually that bad. A squad of goblin scouts here to see the wreckage the giant was supposed to leave instead realize they have to finish the job themselves and attack. While half the Dwarven soldiers are gone, the remainders have put on enough armor and studied the blade enough to charge their way up the hill and win without losses even though they're outnumbered. It's enough proof of Syloblin Sham's military prowess that the same goblin they just rescued comes asking for sanctuary. She might be a spy the goblins threw 10 soldiers' lives away to help implant, but surely not. That'd be too low even for them. Another raid frees yet another prisoner, who also follows the military back and asks for safety. This one's a baroness consort of one of the cities in the Homeland. When asked, she confirms that she'd heard the higher-ups talking about how they expected Syloblin Sham to long be dead, and so sent her to establish a stronghold in the conquered Dwarven pits. It went well at first, but the goblins' unmatched fury ensured a slew of attacks that ended with her being captured and the Homeland refusing to negotiate for her. Only now does she realize what they're actually about, and so she comes to the city she originally turned her nose up at for a chance of safety. Another raid brings back the first metal axe. Onal, the most prominent axe wielder, the leader of the squad, finally loses her wooden one. She has good company and a full squad of 10 soldiers that all have metal weapons of some kind, but those are mostly strange foreign stuff like flails and scourges that don't seem to fit a dwarf's hand nearly as well. Oh, but the good news does not stop there. Even better than one mere weapon is the next raid, which brings a single iron bar. Finally, after 2 full years of raiding, what must have been 100 adventures, it is here. Locum is a peasant of no real renown till now, but she builds the furnace that starts metalworking and the cascade towards dominance. Soon, this will stoke coals and hope. The general plan is to use this new smelter and the charcoal generated at a wood furnace to smelt down metal items. These give only a fraction of the bars used to make them, and far less than making metal from ore, but it is still something. Most of the unusable copper and iron loot brought back by the military will end up being used this way. The first copper bar that pops out is turned into a nearby metalsmith, to eventually work further bars into more useful gear. This is the start of something beautiful, but the raids must continue before they see the fruit of this work. There's plenty to melt down for now, but they have 2 years worth of loot stored up to go through, and that's still not nearly enough for the more than 100 metal bars needed to fully outfit a single squad. There are a couple legendary weaponsmiths to choose from for the first forge, while a second metalsmith is staffed by Lore, the best armorsmith, to make sure that gear is as high quality as it can be. The next metal bars, though, are turned into mechanisms to help power the mist generator and pump stack near the end that has been ignored for so long. Oh, of course. The first raid since finding that iron bar comes back with a nickel bar. There have been over 100 raids, and they find the second fireproof bar immediately after they get their first. Alright. At least that nickel bar will make for a pretty glass furnace, I guess. Enough iron is smelted down to make a weapon, and so it's time to choose between the legendary smiths. Ast, the militia captain, is depressed as a penguin in a desert, and they need a break from raiding. The other choice is Tulon, the archer, who is just as depressed and also needs a break. Unfortunately for Ast, though, they've led raids at this point, and they've become a good tactician, which is incredibly important for the war to come. Toulon gets the break, and Ast gets a lesson about hard work not being rewarded. She prepares the first iron axe and gets an order for 10 more. This weapon might not be anything special at most fortresses. My previous fort had gear made from the higher quality and more labor-intensive steel in their first year, which this fortress is both never going to have the materials to make, and is only struggling to make the worse iron 3 years in. But after working so hard for it, this is a beautiful thing to see, and it will help truly start turning the tides. Lower tier metals like copper are perfect for armor until everyone has their iron weapons. It isn't long before the Axe Squad, led by Onul, get orders to start wearing proper metal armor on their chest and start wielding the metal axes they've trained so much for, though they do still wear shell wherever they can. There's still a need for more gear both for them and for the other soldiers, but they're getting much more prepared for war. Without worry that they'll fall in love with wooden weapons, the squad once more returns to training. They'll defend the city from counterattacks as they prepare to be legendary soldiers, and other squads are freed up to go continue raiding. They almost immediately bring back another fireproof bar. It took over 100 raids to get the first, and then 3 more adventures to steal another 2. Burning goblin villages down and making the first progress of the war will make me just feel better about it. Unfortunately, while Onul is amazing with an axe, she is not a tactician. Ast has led their own squad through a ton of stealthy raids, and he'll do a fine job with an axe while leading the squad. It's a demotion for Onul, but if it means keeping the axe dwarves safe, it's worth it. Eton can lead the stealthy squad, still trying to loot everything they can get their hands on and do a horrible job of it. On their first mission, they're immediately caught and they die for it. Alright Locum, you're up for that squad. At least you can't do any worse than your predecessor. The other squads, though, set their eyes on modest witches. It handed the dwarves their first losses so long ago, but now, almost 20 proud dwarves, in a truly unique mix of metal, leather, and shell I genuinely don't believe you or any other player has ever used, sets their sights on it. While they're gone, the windmills are hooked up, though the pumps can't do anything to the ice until it thaws. When they return, the military brings good news. The soldiers struck at a city of 75, but claimed kill after kill after kill. They win every last fight with their skill and their gear, and though they don't fully raise the site, they do take the population down to just 10. One more attack finishes the job off, and results in both the first smell of smoke in the air and some amazing loot for the trouble. It isn't the goblins that strike back, but a ferocious bird. So, you know how everyone put all the metal they had into axes and not bolts? Yeah, this thing can fly. Archers head for the top of the tower atop the carpentry area to try and shoot it as it darts in, but it dives past them, picks someone off, then flies away. A few swings did manage to make it bleed, but the wounds clot in midair and it's ready for more. It can bite people's legs off, so, you know, maybe making leggings out of shell and not copper isn't a great idea. While everyone is in the south, it flies in from the east, then flies high again before swooping back into the south, while soldiers futilely chase after where it was. The thing kills a few helpless kids, then a few civilians who come to try and save the kids' bodies. It isn't until the soldiers stop chasing it and instead station themselves at its favored feeding ground that they manage to kill it before it can flee. But just look at all these corpses. It's time to start taking safety a little more seriously now that bodies are needed to throw at the goblins. The blossoming military can help with most threats, but it clearly can't help with all of them, and the environment is still a problem of its own. The river's already drowned a few people, and so much more foot traffic is passing by the front now than when they started to build floors over it. It's not long before the snow starts to melt, and that ice once again threatens to thaw. Elven traders are ushered away before it does. It's not like there's much for them here. The dwarves deal in food from wooden barrels and gear made from shells, and the elves are violent hippies that hate anyone who hurt a creature. Arush the mayor, who stepped up after Psylob died too young, leaves their axe behind as the growing city needs someone to organize it. They plan out ongoing raids that continue destroying goblin settlements and start to work down even the larger towns of almost 100 so that the more threatening fortresses have no advanced warning when it's their turn. Spring deepens, and it isn't long before the river thaws and the pump starts working. It sends water upwards and down the channel, where it falls past the tavern and into the reservoir below. However, it's taking longer than expected to actually drain from there. Much longer. More water falls down in and then slips out the south. One windmill is disassembled to stop the pumps from wetting everyone's ankles instead of just leaving them in the splash zone. Though the waterfall did at least make the dwarves there happy for the 5 seconds it was working. This will be important since moods are very, very rough and only growing worse over time. The military's continued ventures out eventually knocked down the nearby 3 goblin settlements that served as a sort of containing hedge wall for Psyloblin Sham. That allows the army to march much further without having to worry about quick counterattacks. And between looted mail shirts and reforged metal worked by lore, more of the military ditches their leather chest pieces for actual gear. There's still not enough for all of them, but it is still something. And the other squads that aren't legendary axe dwarves get the hand-me-downs and what else is left. One squad, the blockaded lovers, continue roaming out constantly, while the others miss some raids to continue training so they aren't unfamiliar with the weight of proper dwarven metal when it's their turn. Since most of the military is venturing out at least part-time now, and there are even times when all the squads are gone, builders work to add a few traps to the front of the base that dream of capturing a dragon who'd be perfect to keep as a pet in this huge tinderbox. Construction also continues near the canal above to provide an outlet for half the water out of the fortress sucked up by a second pump. It might flood the plains to the south, but that's not a dwarf's problem. Progress is interrupted by another fresh delivery of metal in the form of 10 more angry goblins. But since they didn't wait for the outgoing raids to actually leave the surrounding area before announcing their why is there just an iron anvil chilling there? Their presence, the soldiers push out and clear almost everyone. Still, a goblin hiding in a tree pelts a civilian also trapped in a tree with arrows and manages to get the only kill of the raid before fleeing soon after. The civilians can mourn, while the military heads back out to claim far, far more as righteous vengeance. In the end, one dead civilian seems frankly worth the precious metal. Dwarves are a little expendable. Summer brings human merchants, who brought bags of sand to sell. Those are actually pretty useful now that there's a glass furnace that can turn it into windows, blocks, or other bits. That still won't help the military glass their enemies though, as the soldiers have to head off further and hit bigger population centers with clusters of settlements. They often kill a site that's resettled before they even return, and so instead they turn their attention farther to the isolated north, which is harder to reinforce from the Goblins' homeland in the frigid tundras to the west. That mixed news of military success puts an even bigger damper on moods that are still suffering. Hopefully, continued improvements to the mist generator will have it working without flooding, and perhaps more roofs above apartments will allow private bedrooms to be built, but this is getting closer and closer to causing major issues. At least continued conquest amass more and more armor to be smelted down for bars that'll make actually useful gear. There are enough metal helmets and leggings to transition the military to it, but the shell is practically iconic at this point. So they're instead going to melt those helmets and legs down to fuel more chest pieces. That may have to change as the war continues, and even if it doesn't, mopping up this empire is the easier task. This one had some 1,500 goblins between little towns of 50 to 100. The other has a fortress of 2,000 and another fortress of 1,000 that'll both have to be conquered. Windmills to power everything are put back in above an inn that technically has windows. These supposedly count as gym windows, even if they look really drafty to me. Everything's installed, water starts flowing, and some still falls down and missed everyone in the inn to make them happy. Half of it is sucked up, goes down the second aqueduct, and spills out just south of the city, where it doesn't seem to cause any flooding or other issues. Despite this wonderful bit of engineering that any dwarf would be happy to call home and definitely wouldn't have nightmares about, no migrants come because the Homeland's caravans never spread tales of the wealth here. They refuse to let any other exiles join the city they obviously want dead. It happens a lot more slowly this time, but the inn does eventually start to flood, and so Dwarven engineering is undone so more infrastructure can divert even more of the water. I can fix this. I can fix this. It ends with this mess, which I'm pretty ashamed of, but it is what has to be done, since deconstructing any floor or walls would technically use the mining tool. This will suck up more of the water and divert it to 2 different spots in the river to hopefully stop flooding the inn. Despite the military prowess growing as even more reforged metal weapons are made, early autumn once again passes without word of a Dwarven caravan. This is a serious problem. The trade was only nominally useful, and doesn't do much now that they have metalworking and fire-safe bars. But without word of the fortress getting back, the Homeland can spread rumors and tales that it's already dead, cutting off protesters and stopping more exiles from choosing to come here. That means the 90-ish dwarves that are inside Goblin right now might be all they ever have to go against Goblin empires with some 5,000 left. Even with a new squad being formed up to start training with axes so they can eventually be useful in the war, that only leaves about 40 soldiers to do what has to be done, and precious few civilians helping them. The aqueduct finally starts pumping again, and this third take on it is still not working. But okay, this time I really can fix it. It's not flooding anywhere, but no water makes it back through the dual pumps that are there to divert some water, so the windmill is removed yet again, and the other side of one of the diverting channels is built to twist back on itself so water can flow back in from the other way and still fall through the inn's grates. Unfortunately, just before it's done and can be tested, the river freezes, and now it'll have to wait another 6 months. You are legally required to watch until you see that I'm not awful at engineering Dwarven aqueducts. This is not a request. I have a second squad of axe dwarves ready to hunt down dissidents that close the tab. Making all this metal gear requires a constant feed of looted goblin metal to be fed to smelters, and so a second one is built to help handle the growing backlog. Feeding that in turn requires a second wood furnace, where a tame goblin that came so long ago can do the job to prove where their loyalty really lies. The Baroness consort saved from the goblin's imprisonment can do much the same at a third wood furnace built days later, though they're there to prove they aren't a crown loyalist instead of a goblin plant. That will help fuel a new line of breastplate production, since that's currently the most needed metal piece by far, though with each requiring 3 bars, it'll be a long time before the entire military is rocking them. While preparing for the military's future, it's time to start another kind of training. Ast has led the attack so far, and they're now a master tactician who excels at fully destroying sites. The other squad commanders, though, have comparatively little experience, since they often tag along with Ast and let them lead. Sarvesh is an adept student, and a lot of the lesser settlements to the north have been purposely left with only a few people. So Sarvesh leads the held boulders and heads that way to start trying to put them down. It'll train them as a second tactician for taking on multiple big jobs in the future, or in the worst case, to take over as Ast ever falls in battle. A vile force of darkness arrives a few days later as the 4th autumn turns to winter, but the goblins forgot to actually send soldiers? There's a few thieves, but the main force of them runs off as soon as they see Ast isn't abroad. They rightfully fear her and her squad mates, who are masters at their craft and great with weapons of choice. Olath is in one of the newer squads, and while she might not know which end of her axe to swing with, she's awfully enthusiastic as she chases a goblin around the entirety of the map just to finally catch and murder them after they tire and try to climb a tree. Sarvesh returns from their first mission already a novice tactician, and they'll spend the foreseeable future heading back to that site or other small ones to hone their skills. That new 5th squad is trained up well enough that 3 of the more experienced squads can now roam out at a time to take one big and one small site every time they head out. This sped up war machine has to achieve results. Results that'll be shared with Mebzoth, the husband of Walk Theater's Count. They're here to visit from one of the main cities of the Empire, though it's hard to see this as anything but a desperate attempt to spy on Siloblinsham. They want to gauge how the trade blockade is faring, but find a decent fortress despite their interference. The citizens act guarded and invite them to send an official diplomat with a proper caravan if they want attention. Ass the Woodcutter is still the only one, elevated to the holy position of the sacred axe. Unfortunately, she is pissed. Those mood improvements need to help her, or the whole fortress might lose a beloved icon, one that's earned them every bit of wood they've used. Sarvesh finally kills their second city on their 7th mission as winter deepens and the year nears its end. Ast and the others continue raiding as well, though the city of Flank Jackals has something going on. It went from a population of 100 to 50 after one raid, which isn't abnormal, but the second one knocked it down to 40, and the third one did nothing to that. They seem resistant, and it's not clear where their reinforcements are coming from. The surrounding cities are small and weak. Could it be from further abroad? It's not from their capital to the southwest, which seems to still be locked in a stalemate with the Homeland's pet projects there. The military rampages through again, but the population only drops from 40 to 30. This is probably going to call for some alternative methods in time, but first, the squads will venture to other cities. The Elven caravan surprisingly continues to show up even though we've spited them like 4 years in a row. They actually bring a giant bobcat, though the few looted amulets made of other things they'll actually take should be able to buy them. If on accident this time, one of the ones offered wasn't made of hoof, which pisses them off yet again. Unlike the last times, this one's actually a shame. Giant animals would have been great for the war machine. Between this shortcoming and ragged clothes on most of the dwarves after 5 years without new outfits, it's time to finally turn ropery dutifully farmed for the better part of 2 years into clothes, tailored by Katin, who gets to work designing outfits, unlike anything she learned to make back in the Homeland. The river's also a bit of a menace to society, though only because kids really like playing on it in late spring. The same time it thaws every year, so this one's kind of on Kumiel. But that thaw also means the screw pumps start pumping water upwards. It's properly split 3 ways and it starts to pour out a hole in the floor. Please God, I just want this to work. I'm so tired of it failing. But at least this problem is easily fixed by one small wall south of the vertical shaft. Once done, everything is hooked back up and water starts to properly flow. Now, should they be bathing in this mist, considering there's like 5 corpses in the water, some of which are upstream? But at least for now, it is working. All of this work is to carefully distribute the water because no one remembered to leave a single drainage hole in the initial altar room almost 4 years ago. And we can't get rid of floors since that's still a mining action. Back abroad, Sarvesh leads his first full fight against a military and not just a small town of civilians. They do great, but why is Sarvesh fighting against a dwarf leading the goblins? Why were they there? And why did the Homeland have such an easy time settling in the southwest without risking the wrath of the goblin empire surrounding them? Back home, the civilians have plenty of time to ponder these questions as they install a massive furniture collection at the start of their own private bedrooms after nearly 4 years. With moods as bad as they are, that might still be too late to stave off a depression spiral. Even though the rooms are kind of tiny and no real dwarf likes being entombed in wood, the beds are both masterfully made by skilled carpenters and expertly decorated by shells, so they should be proud to own such nice things. Hopefully, that's worth the tendinitis. Building those gives the civilians something to do, while Ast and the squads they lead set their sights in the southwest goblin capital cities of Hexspike, Horror Scorching, and Fly Vices. Fitting names for wretched goblin places. The attacks on their capital cluster that killed dozens draw the Empire's last military they've got back to the Dwarven fortress, seeking not war, but an end to it. It's a good thing they do want peace, since if they attack now, there would be a lot of trouble. The main forces are all abroad trying to bring down the capital. The blockaded rewards take but a day. It's good they're back already, since the supposedly tame goblin inside the fort is talking about how the whole idea of loyalty is pointless. So they're definitely not about to sabotage things to help the goblins outside. Before they can, Ast returns with news they burned a capital city down, and the goblins are finally engaged enough to prompt their impromptu delivery of iron. Arab sleeps on the battlefield to be. I gotta get that last minute power nap in, I guess. The soldiers could go hit the goblins where they're approaching from, but they'd have the tactically advantageous high ground, and even more importantly, it would mean hauling the iron from their corpses back a little bit further. It isn't until the goblins murder a civilian on the edge of the map that the soldiers start marching out to stop any more from dropping. The newbie squad stays back, but 30 experienced soldiers push up the hill and get into a brawl with the goblins. They're largely outgeared, especially below the waist, but they all have good training and a dwarven spirit, so they cut through their foes with only the occasional injury. The goblins, meanwhile, quickly break and start to flee, but the soldiers chase them down to kill a few more. Every single last kill means another iron breastplate or mail shirt to keep them safe in the larger wars to come. The civilians leave the fortress to start reclaiming all this gear and smelt it down, while they also re-elect Arush as mayor for orchestrating this victory against the First Goblin Empire's main military. All of this despite tough conditions, the Homeland's abandonment, and the almost finished homelessness crisis. The capital cluster in the southwest will be crushed by Ast before they can even hear their forces lost, and the other settlements can continue being cleaned up by Sarvesh. Though no military members lost their lives in the last fight, there still is some damage done. Erdem took some brutal blows to her legs and can no longer stand, meaning she's relieved of duty. She's not the last victim of the war either. Libash dies in the next raid, and though the dwarves won, that's the first dwarven loss abroad in quite some time. The remaining soldiers go back and get vengeance by finishing the job. Well, those bedrooms need to finish soon to help moods, because the mist generator is not doing much. It's been most of a season, but people are still in really bad moods. And it turns out that eating near a waterfall that gets your food soggy doesn't make up for being haunted by the dead, being horribly out of shape, and being too poor to own anything. Welcome to 2024, Onal. At least the Sacred Axe Ast is feeling slightly better. She's only a reddish angry face instead of a red, really angry face, so, that's progress. The bedrooms are even officially great thanks to shell-decorated furniture, so at least that's something. In fact, since Arush the mayor isn't very happy, their ugly old furniture is taken out so it can be replaced with better shell-decorated stuff. Despite all of this, it's looking more and more like the dwarves are depressed enough that they might spiral out of control without anything that can save them from it. Between that and issues that'll arise from it, plus the occasional loss of a military member, all in a fortress that can't seem to replace itself with fresh migrants, this could spell doom. The 4th year passes with Alath, the captain of the most recent squad, officially becoming an adept axe dwarf through hard work, some very repetitive apartment designs, because you're crazy if you think I'm busting out the fancy designs when I have to build out every last wall manually, and an explosion of metal armor as the last goblin raid's iron is all smelted down. The military steals various tomes and scrolls from the Goblin capital before they finally burn it down on a follow-up attack. All the other settlements are tiny little ones, with just a few cobbled together shacks that a goblin or three hold on to dear life while hoping for mercy or a savior that just won't come. The last story of the first apartment complex is finished, with 4 levels of 14 apartments that mean over half the dwarves will live here. And there's another building project in the works for the rest. Before that though, a library is finished up above the carpentry quarter in the southwest, and some of the more notable and skilled workers are assigned as scholars who will write down their experiences for the future generations on imported paper. Some of the dwarves, including the depressed Ast, start to read books there and actually really love it. The Sacred Axe even immediately picks up another book they stole from the goblins. Feeding her growing desire will mean more pillaging, so it's a good thing that forges finish making breastplates and switch to making shields to finish off the armory. Finished armory in a way, soldiers are venturing out completely naked, and that's not just visual either. They really just decided to become nudists before going off to battle, and though they do all come back in one piece, they still don't have anything on. Telling them to update their armor works, but there's still one grave sin. They ditch shell armor for steel. Gross. Logical? Yes. The better choice? Absolutely. A sin against all Siloblincham stands for? Of course. They're told that all that fancy metal gear is off limits for their legs, helm, and gauntlets, but even having them update their gear won't make them actually ditch what they've already got on. The only way to handle that, since squads still can't be told to equip shell gear specifically, is to start over. But I mean, super worth it. After a quick update, everyone starts running around to pick up their actual gear, and the only remnant that they ever dared try to touch steel leggings is the changed squad names. There's also a little bit of reorganization, filling out the main squad's losses with some experienced soldiers from Alice squad, while the latter gets new recruits to train up in the last squad, the Evenness of Vestibules. But the squad leaders are all still the same. This did still allow some upgrades to pilfered steel gear above the waist, but everything that can be shell will be, and only a few soldiers are in anything better than iron. Still, the extra recruitment further draws from the dwindling number of civilians that'll be left as the military heads back out. Not that such a problem prompts more action from Mark's dwarves, who continue lazing about even while they demand a guild hall. They don't deserve it, but they keep asking, and denying it means negative thoughts. So the ongoing mood issues force precious resources and space into use appeasing those who are likely the most useless dwarves in the fortress. Fortunately, there's not that much more to do to mop up the First Empire, with most of the sites inhabited by only a goblin or two who flee from any attacks. But the adventuring soldiers leave a deeply unhappy city. The mist generator isn't enough. They miss friends and family from the homeland. The dwarves need to re-establish a connection with them, but once again, no caravan arrives. The homeland might as well not exist this far out, and only finishing the fight and killing both empires will get the dwarves the peace they deserve. The abounding depression is so bad that one of the kids just has an animal skeleton in his room, so that'll definitely be featured in some serial killer show in the future. Though some of the dwarves leaving skeletons of their own behind can be put to rest properly, plenty can't, and with other children constantly slipping into a depressed state, it's little surprise that one ghost starts to act up. This departed child seems to love destroying workshops, strewing about what was inside them all around. It's hard to imagine a lot of people would want to come to a fortress haunted by the dead, even if traders were here to spin positive tales about the place. There's still no way to deal with the problem that ghosts present, but maybe dwarves seeing the progress they're making outside in the world manifest in the form of metal statues might help. This definitely is not the best or most efficient use of this stuff, but after struggling for so long to have even basic metal, these are wonderful flexes. The ongoing mood and ghost problems have to be offset by more and more, but there is plenty of stuff in the Fortress of Siloblincham. There are good friends and groups that discuss things in the library, and so it's unsurprising that most of the angriest dwarves are kids that can't enjoy the nicer things, and soldiers who spend most of their time abroad. The former just seems spoiled though. Their recent memories are all pleasant, only mildly marred by bits of rain and being haunted by their dead childhood friends. So ungrateful. Moods are so bad that a brawl breaks out, and though this one wasn't too bad, these can get absolutely nasty and cause chain cascades. The kids continue throwing tantrums, then feel worse because they're embarrassed to have started a brawl because of them, which keeps their mood from getting better despite all the nice things they have. Which, I mean, they should feel bad. Half a dozen dwarves are in the hospital because of that brawl. That's almost 1/10 of the entire population of the fortress at this point. It's probably good news that the bedrooms are finally done. There are just barely enough for everyone in these 2 larger apartment buildings, plus smaller areas of them scattered about. Maybe moods would be better if the fortress of flank jackals would just fall, but even though they loot it time and time again, soldiers continue to bring back news that they just rampage through. There's a plan to deal with that in place, but this will have to be the last vestige of the First Empire, and so the soldiers turn on other small settlements and rush to finish them off before Syloblinchaum's dying hope kills everyone here. It's into this bleak atmosphere that the same Count Consort as before returns, once more just to spy on the fortress and report back to the ambivalent Homeland, to both look busy and continue building out the fort. Large stretches of floor are built above important areas on the ground to hopefully shield the dwarves there from rain and snow. The dwarves also brag about the improved and newly legendary dining room, complete with a few pilfered stone tables and the freedom to enjoy a little martial training. Random civilians are going to be rotated through this squad in order to make them happy, since dwarves inherently love a little martial training every once in a while. It's not a terrible idea to have them all gain a little bit of experience, so they stand a little bit more of a chance if they're ever accosted by a random goblin. Plus, some of them might have to join the military in time, and this will shave some months off how long it takes to turn them into proud goblin killers. The new year arrives with far fewer settlements to conquer on the outskirts. They take just a couple of weeks to knock them over, leaving the seemingly impenetrable flank jackals. Every military squad joins up for their first massive mission out. 45 dwarves, half the population here, marches on flank jackals for one last attempt. But even that isn't enough, and the city still stands. It's time for a change of strategy. One of the more angry dwarves, Momez, is assigned to a new squad with a couple other random unimportant civilians. Instead of heading out to raise it, they go to man the local forces' surrender so that they can take over and occupy it. Assuming that works, this will be the end of the First Empire, and it'll be time to turn the military's attention on the second one, the Noiseless Thieves. It's the greater of the 2 foes, with a mass of towns, each with 50 to 100 in the east, a fortress of 1,000 there, then the huge fortress of 2,000 goblins to the west that have had plenty of time to spy on soldiers marching past. It's led them to complacency though, and so it's time for a surprise attack. The military once again forms up and marches out to start a new war, by all marching in different directions to the north and east, even though their enemy lies to the west. Ast leads them wonderfully. They kill a few scouts and random civilians outside the walls, then engage the organized defenses inside. Each squad faces off against dozens and dozens of them, but mark 8 or 12 kills without loss. The dwarves eventually retire and have to retreat, but the attack was a huge success and a great way to start a war that now consumes the entire continent. Hundreds of goblins died, and only one dwarf met their end at the gates of the biggest threat to this entire mission. That news is made even better when a missive brings back word that Logam's mission to flank jackals worked. The 3 unarmed dwarves came in, politely asked the 30 goblins the military couldn't even find to give up, and executed their leader in front of them. The 3 now run a new Dwarven empire at this old site, which is the end of the Scorpion of Froth. all that are left of what was a great empire are smoldering ruins and a warning to the rest of this world's goblins. But since the remaining war will be drawn out, and there's always the threat that much larger forces will attack Syloblinsham now, squads will take turns staying home to defend. It'll give them time to relax and recuperate, so since the Granite Pulleys has the saddest dwarves, they get that time off first, and everyone else heads back to Lesser Minas to continue the job their sneak attack started. Ignoring it to focus on the cities to the east would make it so easy for Syloblinsham to be surrounded. Oh, good God, do the soldiers need more of a break though, and probably some therapy? I don't think they're getting any of the latter and not so much of the former. Without new migrants, there's no time to let them recuperate for a year or two, since random attacks and deaths would continue draining the fortress's population. It's already a war of 90 against 4,000. There's no sense of making it 80 fighting the fight instead. The civilians just playing soldier for fun, however, are having a great time. I kind of love how the game makes a bit of soldiering great, and lots of soldiering absolutely soul-shattering. And so the battles continue. The second raid cuts down hundreds more, and the fortress is already down to just half its original population. The third battle sends a couple hundred more goblins to their grave. The psychopathic kid finally hides the animal skeleton under the bed to avoid getting questions about it, and the fourth raid continues making good progress against the goblins. That same spy consort comes back, and though he swears he just loves it here, most of the residents hate or barely tolerate this place, so that's definitely a lie. A temple to Rosh, the god of death that almost half the fortress understandably worships, goes in case they're scared to worship someone so fearsome in the more general temples. The fifth raid, some month after they started, officially breaks through the gates and they rampage about the fortress. The goblin forces are weakening, and the soldiers are able to loot Lesser Minas treasures. There's a ton of silver, though nothing particularly impressive just yet. Fortunately, there's tons more to take in future attacks. Some of what they brought back now decorates new temples going in to allow further worship of other notable gods throughout the fortress. The God of Minerals has 23 worshippers here, which kind of seems ironic since no one's ever mined anything. A small goblin counterattack arrives, but the experienced soldiers sticking back to defend the place, and the cosplayers help venture out to kill them with but a single loss. Unfortunately, a second dwarf is bleeding out, and she's an important one. Cattle is the legendary bone carver who arrived in one of the first waves of migrants and has done all of the bolt making, shell crafting, and wonderful decorating for the entire fortress. She was just in the squad for fun. Perhaps the cosplayer should have been kept closer to the back lines. The ghost child's reign of unending terror on unsuspecting workstations continues, and the fifth raid on Lesser Minas once more breaks through. They kill a bunch of goblins that were trying to look like civilians, but both harbored and were likely to themselves turn into vile soldiers. And with the recent counterattack defeated, the entire military is able to head out to try and defeat it once and for all. While they're gone, Summer brings a human caravan, from which the remaining dwarves buy materials to make books that they probably should have had going for themselves a long time ago to help fill out the relatively empty but fairly grand library. Though most of the loot being stolen by hundreds of raids is mediocre copper or better iron, a few of them have managed to steal golden bars and items from the goblins, no doubt themselves pilfered from dwarven settlements or human traders. Some are turned into mugs that'll hopefully make drinking in the already amazing dining room even better. Others will go towards some other goals for the future. The sixth attack does manage to knock the fortress down to a population of just 50, but that somehow isn't enough to stop the Dwarven kids from constantly sinking in and out of depression, even though they've long since succeeded in crying their way out of having to do chores. One final level of a wall starts chewing through what was a huge stockpile of wooden blocks. There are 3 workstations that have been going almost full time for a while now. There would be a 4th, but Onal, the first carpenter, still has that now unused station left in their honor. Cattle, who did all the shell crafting, doesn't get that same honor extended to her at her former crafting station. Someone else will take over and hopefully do just a fraction of the job she managed. Fortunately for them, and unfortunately for everyone else, there will be plenty of time to train. After 8 attacks, the once huge fort of Lesser Menace still refuses to go down. It too might have to be conquered, which will force another few civilians from the relatively limited pool to keep it pacified. That can happen in time, so the army instead focuses on the eastern towns so they can start draining the goblins' numbers one site and 75 people at a time. Things don't exactly continue well though. Dwarves are too depressed to work at times. Ghosts continue breaking workshops and force them to be rebuilt. The civilians training for fun stop to help bolster the shrinking workforce. The only upside is that the militarized fortress continues doing the one thing it's great at, as it destroys site after site in the east. Given that half the dwarves are directly involved in the military, and some 10 civilians are involved in fueling them, it's a damn good thing they do. No more could be offered to the military, and this is already a society circling the drain, slowly atrophying to war, river drownings, and depression brawls. It's a race to see the end of their mission at this point, and whether or not they'll make it is anybody's guess. Everyone knows it, even if no one will actually say the words. It doesn't help that people randomly die when others dump trash corpses on them sometime. It's okay though. Doctors are really kinda optional here, so losing a diagnostician is probably fine. At least the Homeland isn't doing that much better. They're under attack from the war they encouraged Siloblinsham to start, and the western dark Dwarven fortresses they have are besieged. Maybe that's why the Goblins' counterattacks have been weak so far. They're focused on the softer targets in this ongoing war. The military continues growing stronger as more iron gear is made and the occasional bit of steel is even produced. But in truth, the military hasn't really run into any hard challenges lately. There's only been 1 or 2 actual soldiers that have died in the years of raids. The deaths come from accidents, brawls, and civilians cosplaying. Still, it's enough that the mass tomb has to be expanded to make room for the departed diagnostician and anyone after them. And for poets to sleep there, that is going to be one hardcore gothic piece. It seems part of the reason the soldiers are perpetually unhappy is that they lose their assigned bedrooms every time they venture out, so they never get to store anything of their own or sleep in a nice room. The front of the base has some furniture added for their barracks so that they sleep on the ground a little less, but that's still not nearly as nice as a proper bedroom, and it definitely won't be enough to offset the spree of negative thoughts consuming them. Snow falls as autumn nears its end, and while they'd hoped to have a roof over the entire fortress to lessen how much snow builds up on their heads, that won't be nearly ready this year. There's only a fraction of the 3,000 and change wooden blocks needed. The soldiers continue heading out, and though they raise a settlement every week or two, the goblins quickly resettle them. Fortunately, they lose their friends every time, who are bled from the fortress that was nearly 1,000. The goblins don't breed that quickly, though it still is a proper war of attrition on the dwarves side too. That's further emphasized as Kavesh, Dobar, and Godin form up into a diplomatic squad to head west to Lesser Menace and demand it surrenders. The move is successful, and they settle into their new home shortly after winter arrives. At least the snowfall is partially stopped. The most important areas are covered by a roof or just rooms above them, though snow will continue decorating the above ground walkways. That brief reprieve somehow is not enough to stop more brawls from breaking out, and it's not clear what could here. The dwarves have access to every amenity they can have. Great rooms, ample opportunities to own things, temples for every major god they could want, a legendary dining room, lavish meals and drinks, opportunities for martial training and to craft. None of that can outpower the desire to see old friends and family left in an uncaring capital, to ward off fear of ghosts continuing to haunt them, or to stave off bitter memories that no amount of booze will keep down. A throne room to be proud of might help a little, It'll make leaders like Arush happier, which might snowball downwards. Precious silver bars slowly looted over the years are turned into silver blocks. Unlike wood, these aren't any more efficient for building than using silver bars, but I have a very good reason for taking the time to make these. I didn't realize that while recording until the very end of this run, and at that point I was too committed to change. The elven caravan once again brings giant animals, including a cockroach. These could be really useful, and so at just 500 dwarf bucks each, the dwarves happily trade away unneeded iron gear. They've come a long way since when they started here and would do anything for this stuff. Though whether or not they'll have time to actually put these beasts to use isn't clear. The last remaining goblin fortress of doomed closes is still bleeding out. It's down from 1,000 to 500, as leadership there sends out civilians to keep resettling sacked sites in hopes of keeping the dwarves from coming for them directly. Though all 3 giant animals were bought, the huge roach and lizard can't be trained, so they are placed in a pasture and otherwise ignored, while the giant jaguar is slated to be turned into a war animal by Thultig, who is both a soldier in the granite pulleys and the only dwarf here with any experience training animals. That said, they are a novice tamer, working on teaching a giant jaguar to kill on command. So if there is an accident, I won't be too surprised. More royalty comes, though this one is a baroness consort from Control. They aren't part of the Homeland, but from another empire. They've heard about the plight here and offer to take Siloblinsham under their wing, even if the disarray apparent when they walk in is likely a little off-putting. While that is a tempting offer, this mocking message twice a year is a reminder that the dwarves here came with a single job. Denying them doesn't stop a different consort from the same empire from inquiring about it soon after, though Siloblinsham may need diplomatic immunity instead of just envoys. The Homeland's consort that's visited a few times is missing, and this is just about a week after the annual thaw. It's not hard to imagine they're at the bottom of the river or some lake, though a cursory glance around doesn't reveal a corpse. Hushed whispers talk about how at least it's better them than another civilian from the fort itself. The goblins continue to bleed people too. The fort's gone from 500 to 100. And so the plans to siege it might never need to be enacted. Or maybe not. A few weeks later, it's back to 400, and scouts say that it was a huge goblin army returning home. If they can mobilize some 300 soldiers, it means they're getting ready to be by far the biggest challenge yet. Perhaps it's best to attack them while they recover from that march. The giant jaguar has even been fully trained and is assigned to Thultig to follow them into battle. The 45 dwarven soldiers line up and prepare to raid that last bastion of goblins at doomed closes. They could take a fortress of 2,000, but this place seems to have a larger army. Still, the dwarves have amazing weapons for their limitations, and they've gotten even better with them. Though the jaguar is so fast that it has to wait for Thultig to run ahead, sprint to catch up, then wait again like it's escorting an NPC. In somewhat terrifying news, Siloblinsham is down to just 37 people when the soldiers leave. Of those, a dozen are kids, and another half dozen are poets and the like. That means that only about 20 dwarves are actually handling day-to-day work at this point. Far worse though, is that the total number of dwarves left in Siloblinsham trickles down further. Even though the soldiers aren't back yet, the winds carry the smell of dead dwarf. It takes another day for the remaining soldiers to limp back through with dejected looks on their faces. They don't struggle with the best the goblins have until they face the leader, the jade brute Sostet Low-Terror hates of subordinates. It's some kind of demon or colossi made of the fancy green rock. They join the fray and start injuring dwarves. Ast, the commander that's led Siloblinsham for so long, threw herself in to try and kill the beast with their legendary skills, but died early, and her supporting soldiers die alongside her. In the end, the Jade Beast struck down 12 proud dwarves on its own, and though the goblins were helpless, the beast cut the army by almost a third of its size in what is easily the biggest defeat and setback Goblin has faced. A goblin counterattack arrives before the soldiers are even fully back yet, but fortunately, attacking the fortress did at least deplete most of the goblin soldiers, and the jade beast stays home, so it's only a few petty snatchers that arrive. They're chased off, but things still look bleak. If just one soldier had struck a lucky blow against the jade beast, the goblins would all but crumble. Their mission would be mop up, not struggle. But now it's not so clear. Creatures made of material like jade need to be beaten with stronger materials, but there are precious few weapons that can be even made from the steel that failed Ast, much less anything stronger like adamantine. The soldiers have little time to mourn, as they must continue heading back off to attack the other goblin cities. It's what Ast would have wanted, what she'd have done. The squads split up to hunt down slightly smaller groups resettled by goblins or left in tatters but not destroyed by initial raids. Each one blames the others for their misfortune and for their losses, and dark moods ferment on the long treks back and forth. The dwarves need a proper distraction, and there's only one suitable project right now. It'll be optimistically called cozy and not cramped, but it'll still be incredibly precious to the dwarves here because it will be the largest construct made of metal they've known in the better part of a decade. There'll still be problems, of course. Most fortresses deal with ghosts by carving slabs or just burying the dead, but Goblin instead deals with it by building 4 clothiers at once, so the raging ghost child takes 4 times as long to destroy them all. I don't know if this kid worked at a clothing sweatshop or something, but he takes vengeance on these things way too much. It doesn't help the living that they just refuse to pray to gods they have temples for. They don't have any friends either, which might be because they're in bad moods, or it might be because they insist on saying they're naked even when they aren't. Some even soberly stumble around every once in a while because of their bad spirits. Half the fort is in an almost dire mood at this point, and I'm not sure that a nice throne room made of metal, or anything else for that matter, can fix it. Choosing to drink pond water when there's literally hundreds of barrels of booze nearby cannot help either. How are they so delirious and dejected? The Fortress of Doomed closes is back down to only sporting a group of 100, which means another 300 goblins ventured out yet again. When reviewing the map after the next Dwarven victory, exactly where those soldiers went is apparent. They marched back west and reconquered Lesser Menaced from the 3 dwarves sent there to capture it in the first place. That means it'll have to be taken back, which is probably going to require more civilians to try and occupy it. How long until the 20 become just dozens? Ast the woodcutter desperately wants to be creative and craft something, so they step up from just being the sacred axe to also handling shells after they finish chopping trees every once in a while. What was a blessed position is now something of a curse that keeps them from being happier. But around Goblin, such curses aren't in short supply. The recaptured fortresses attack further west, taking land back from the homeland that settled there so long ago. The dwarves here don't actually care about them losing their foothold, but it does mean that there's another site they'll have to retake. At least the last few hundred wooden blocks needed to fully roof off the entire fort are done being made, even if the color mismatch is truly hideous. In the end, this fortress will only have one beautiful space, and that starts with alternating silver and bismuth bronze stripes for floors. At least the goblins still seem too weak to attack with a proper military as they extend their forces so far west. It's always just little raids from barely competent goblin thieves trying to steal just like the dwarves had to do when they were just starting out. Not that Goblin isn't dwindling back that way. The military still has strong soldiers, but Sarvesh isn't nearly as good as genocide as the departed commander Ast, who died to the Jade Beast, was. So Sarvesh's attacks only rampage through instead of destroying their targets more often than not, and progress in the war slows down. The civilians finally finish building out the roof, and since the fortress is about 50 by 60, that's well over 3,000 wooden blocks, 750 logs, or about 100 trees used just to block out snow and rain. And that's only like a third of what's in the fortress in total. It's actually insane that the elves haven't chastised Sham like they do with so many fortresses for chopping down all the trees. Whatever this empire is doing to make its sites more defensible and harder to raise is quickly applied to the newest conquered towns the Homeland used to own in the far southwest. It's similarly impossible to take these out without occupying them, costing more and more civilian lives that are definitely not expendable at this point. Perhaps attacking to the east to help train Sarvesh will be enough to make a difference in taking the harder to tackle settlements. It might also get the forges enough silver weapons, trap components, and random knickknacks to smelt down for the throne room to be. Sarvesh is more than able to destroy these towns of 75 in one go, but the towns of 75 to the west are rampaged through without the population dropping by more than 25 even after multiple raids. I wonder what makes the game say, no, you cannot conquer this place. Do these fortresses just wall themselves off and turtle? Are they cheesing us? Maybe sending a tame war pet that can destroy buildings would work. At least there'll be plenty of mad dwarves to send to occupy them, made even more numerous by more and more ghosts fed by the ever-growing number of corpses. This one's the dead consort that got stuck in a lake last year, who will understandably be very pissed off at Sham. But counterpoint, the dwarves here told her to leave a lot, so kind of on them. At least the throne room's silver walls are looking really good. Future work on it will likely be slow though, as the squad of cosplayers resumes training full time to maybe be a better fighting force that can defend the town proper, which will free the more experienced soldiers to head out and raid more quickly. Decoration of the throne room still starts with what's left of the civilian workforce, and walls are marked to be engraved as the last silver is brought in from abroad. I think everyone's only going to do a little bit of engraving, then leave room for the others. Sure, assigning this all to one or two people might make them better and improve the quality of the work, but doing it this way ensures that everyone will tag a small space. It's kind of like Dwarven quilting in the metal, and after working so hard to come together and build all of this, everyone deserves to leave their own artistic signature on the ground. A fight about who will engrave where breaks out at the front of the base. There have been a few of these brawls before, but none have been quite this bad. 5 dwarves die almost immediately, while nearly a dozen more end up in the hospital. Given that there's only one doctor with any kind of experience to handle all of them, and an inexperienced goblin has to be added to the roster to hopefully do some more basic tasks, more of the injured drop before too long. This brawl took the civilian population from 44 all the way down to 37, and that includes the 10 kids and all the poets. There are so few hands left to work the base and do needed things like take the injured needed water from a frozen lake they can't access anyways. Half those that even survived are largely left with permanent injuries that'll stop them from living happy and productive lives. The worsening moods and depression sprees that understandably abound afterwards will only make these kinds of outbreaks even worse and more frequent in the future. The soldiers return after a successful raid, but what do they even come back to? More blood to help clean like they did their weapons at camp on the trip back? Oh, Armek, not another brawl. It's only been a month, though fortunately this one doesn't seem too bad. It's probably not a good sign that it's impossible to tell if the injured are from this brawl or still recovering from the last. The way the walls and roof keep out the rain and snow is little consolation at this point, especially because heavy snow and slush chill the beard of every dwarf who goes out to fetch logs. More fights break out. The blacksmith just randomly killed a nearby beak dog. These creatures are goblin pets that are stolen on raids fairly frequently, and they're a reminder of the foul beasts that keep the dwarves here, so it's unsurprising that someone lashes out in anger and beats the thing to death. As miserable as it is, working on the throne at least gives them purpose. Almost half the population might be pissed off beyond belief and likely beyond recovery, but soon they'll have a brass statue they can look at. By setting up some stockpiles to only take the right furniture and configuring the workshop, Ass the woodcutter even starts to decorate them with bone and shell, making the almost foreign metal better fit Goblin shop. The dwarves need good news. They need to know that the mission is close to done, that their suffering is almost over. All the soldiers set their sights back on Lesser Menaced, the largest concentration of goblins left. If the Jade Beast moved there, they'll be slaughtered. But if it isn't, they could take out half the remaining force. While they leave, a few more people sign their work in the throne room to be. They don't exactly leave a glowing review at this point, but that's just part of life here. It's a true tale of dwarven perseverance, warts and all. Fortunately, this fight at least ends in victory, and the goblins drop from 300 to 50. A follow-up attack ends with, right. This place has to be occupied, not razed. That's 3 already, which means another 6 or 9 civilians lost in time. With the soldiers having won a hard-fought fight though, they take a bit of a break to do some detailing of their own. Then a chunk of them inscribe the difficulties they face on the floor to finish off what's there. There's still a little bit more, but as the last silver from half a decade of raids is smelted down, the artisans say they still need 6 more bars procured from abroad for it to be fully complete. Ast, meanwhile, continues decorating brass and bronze statues, gold and silver thrones, and some iron tables, all to get it ready for the throne room. She's starting to get better at this and actually feels satisfied about her work, which is a nice change of pace since she's been depressed for like 4 years. Oh god, why is she being accosted by hamsters and the undead? What even is Goblin shop? Such mixed comedy and horror don't stop more royals from coming to try and recruit the dwarves to their empire, but their words ring hollow. The dwarves want but one thing at this point, and they'll only find that peace when they've started to tune out the all too familiar sound of goblin skulls crunching beneath boots. Aerith, who's now an accomplished metalcrafter, makes the nicest throne yet out of platinum, though the well-made chair still needs to be decorated with shells and bone before it can be placed where it belongs. Perhaps those will be goblin bones. Another attack comes, but there are actual soldiers amongst them. Most of the dwarves are out too, so the cosplaying squad that's been training up will have to do, even if they do lack some basic equipment. Fortunately, they're able to catch a few goblins rounding a corner where archers can't hit them for free. They kill them, then charge out to batter those cowardly bow shooters. Unfortunately, a nasty bolt takes out one of Stodier's legs and permanently robs them of their ability to stand, but it's the only injury. The more experienced soldiers return soon after, but there's only time to briefly stop and congratulate the once civilians for a job well done, then carve a little more of the throne room out before they head back. Even with 4 fortresses that need to be occupied instead of razing now, there's lots of other raidable places to destroy. Altogether, this leaves less than 1 screen of actual workers around the fortress. Most players will have more than this by the end of their first year, but as the fortress's 7th anniversary ticks along, there's less than 10 workers here as the soldiers head out. Everyone else in the fort is an artist or a kid. Moses is the newest poet that's joined, and she's had literally nothing but bad experiences so far, so it's perhaps unsurprising there aren't more people here. They're already talking about ditching as soon as they can, and it's only been a couple of months. Victories abroad have stopped helping the moods, but hopefully the throne room will. The furniture is as decorated as it's going to be, so a few brass statues go in before a couple of nice metal thrones are placed for the fortress's leaders. A few wooden ones go in for the audience. There's room for a few nice tables, and they're not even all in before the place is designated as an office and officially becomes a royal throne room. It is by far the nicest part of the fortress, which is a shame because there's not exactly much use for it beyond flexing on the occasional diplomat and making the mayor happy to do business here. The morale boost is at least enough that the soldiers take out their first big town of 50 in a while, leaving just a couple more of those and a splattering of smaller settlements with some single-digit number of foes. with Sarvesh now a high master of tactics. Working through those hopefully won't take too long. The other settlements though will each need one of 4 teams of 2 people, since that's all the fortress can afford at this point. There are a few poets and musicians amongst them, plus most of the soldiers that were once civilians who were just practicing for fun that now act as muscle for the diplomatic duos that head out to politely ask leaders to allow themselves to be executed. It takes 10 days for the first squad petitioning Lesser Menace, the fortress to the west, to officially leave Sham. Destat founds the Fog Door of Virgins, which will hopefully fare better than the last Dwarven kingdom founded at this place before it was retaken by the Goblins. The Envoys sent to Doom closes, the fortress with the Jade Beast, don't fare successfully, but they do come back alive after being told no. Another week passes and Moses, that new poet who had a bad experience at Sham, founds the Tomb of Groups at one of the sites. This exodus is partially offset by the first birth Sham scene. It's the only way the fort can actually grow a population at this point, though of course it won't be nearly fast enough to replenish the losses from war and to the environment, especially since most people are not motivated to have kids here. I can't imagine wanting kids when the children that are here throw tantrums that regularly hurt people. The military heads back out just in time for word to arrive that the 4th set of envoys achieved their goal and founded a new society. That leaves just 3 small towns to siege down, plus the fort that will have to be occupied by a larger group than a mere duo. Since the granite pulleys have suffered quite a bit and all have very bad moods, they're told to go back with the envoys to try and force the Jade Beast to surrender. It'll mean they no longer help conquer, but with so few goblins left, that shouldn't be that bad of a deal. The kids are beating a human beast hunter death butcher now. It's only a matter of time until they hit something that'll hit back hard enough to wipe Sham off the map. One of the small towns goes down, but even with 8 dwarves visiting doomed closes, the demand to surrender is still rejected. The soldiers set out to try and raise the last 2 small villages. With the end in sight, the dwarves start looking further abroad. The Homeland is at war with a couple Necromancer towers, but those aren't part of the Goblin Empire they have to slay. Unfortunately though, the 2 forest retreats in the north are, and one of them has 750 goblins. Only one little town in the south is still standing after the soldiers venture out. They came back in good spirits, ready to be done, and it is with great regret the mayor still tells them there is a fierce battle ahead. All the soldiers once more group up to head north, far past where they've ever gone before, to attack the fortress of Tulip Shaft and the last stronghold of goblin strength. Autumn reaches the halfway point, and it only takes another few days for the soldiers to return with nothing but good news. They killed 250 goblins in total, rampaged through the streets on their first go, and looted all kinds of treasures. They only barely get them to the gate before immediately heading back to finish the job while the goblins struggle to recover. The books they stole are pretty cute though. Humans definitely cannot save the world, as evidenced by the fact that this book is about humans at Tulip Shaft, that now filthy goblin settlement. It's such a pathetic town that 40 soldiers fully destroy the 500 goblins inside and raze the site fully. I've never seen such a big fortress taken out in one go like this. Oh look, it's not the child ghost toppling buildings now, it's just someone else incessantly throwing tantrums. If the bad moods don't doom everyone, the likely final goblin counterattack might. They are desperate for peace, and like the First Empire, sent the largest force yet to try and cow Sham into agreeing, but only their deaths will bring it. There's dozens, and they are very well equipped. The soldiers are here though, and the clash that breaks out sends birds scattering from the trees. 2 dwarves fall, but all the goblins pay for the crime with their lives before the dwarves crunch back over their eerily cold bodies. There's no time to mourn Dwarven dead though. The raids must resume. They are so close. Fiend Horns seems like it's also going to take some envoys to occupy it, since 40 dwarves can't find a few stragglers, and the 2 civilians once more leave life here to run the place. It quickly works, and more are sent to the last little village. The final fortress of Doomed closes though, we'll get a larger military heavy group. 10 didn't work last time, so Goblin desperately sends 20 soldiers. Just don't tell the Jade Beast there that it could probably 1v20 them. The 2 civilians do their job at one site, and though it takes the military a little longer, they eventually convince the last holdouts to surrender. The Jade Beast is executed, his loyalist followers join them in death, and the dwarves take over. It hurts to say goodbye to squads that have served so loyally for so long. After their tremendous work though, being royalty has to count for something, and it has to be better than living here. The remaining soldiers immediately head out to clean up the Dwarven Necromancer towers in the northeast near the Homeland. They aren't targets they have to face, but it's all the soldiers know, and they'll have to head that way to tell the Homeland they've won the war eventually anyways. And this is a victory, Pyrrhic though it may be. Goblin is strong, but also Homeland, please let the dwarves here immediately return from exile. Do not make them stay another day here. Half the population is not miserable. The soldiers aren't PTSD-riddled psychopaths who set out again for the last justifiable target they can attack. Even the supposedly happy 3 people here all are riddled with extremely negative thoughts going on, so even that seems like they're just putting on a show. The last Necromancer towers go down, the treasure stolen away. We have the knowledge of the elf, which is literally worth less than half that of other books. If that is intentional, it is an incredible joke, Kit Fox. The world is safe. The battle is over, but the Homeland refuses to let the dwarves come back. This was always supposed to be a death mission, and now they insist the dwarves of Goblin stay to reap the rewards of their hard-fought victories in the south. Accomplishing such a task means they must have an awfully successful society. So why is everyone mad? Why aren't they celebrating? Don't they know they won? That ends Goblin-Sham's tale. This video kinda got out of hand. I love when I don't know if a challenge will end in failure or in success, and I hope you like this too. If you did, make sure to like this video. This and my last run have been kind of a practice for my next video. 4 months ago, I set out to conquer the world in Dwarf Fortress, and I failed miserably. Now I'm better equipped to put out a real fight. So check it out for an amazing journey, even though I have kind of spoiled it, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.